morning comes too early, hands already warm, working for a better day, trying to keep me warm. Boss man count his tally.
In this, our final session on the book of Ecclesiastes, we read and discuss chapters 11 and 12. This has been a story about accepting death and embracing life. How should we think about death, about someone else's death, about our own mortality? Is it more difficult to watch someone else's death than to accept our own? Chapter 11 begins with a discussion of uncertainty. How should we act? What should we do when we don't know what the future holds? Should we freeze up and do nothing? Qohelet gives advice for the young man in the manner of Proverbs, if not the same advice. In chapter 12, he turns back to the issue of unavoidable death. Chapter 12 closes with a short epilogue written by an editor, not Qohelet, who seems to want to discount much of the uncertainty in the book that turns its readers back to the path of piety. But right now, we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In this study of the book of Ecclesiastes, we have primarily used the works of Julie Ann Duncan, Robert Alter, and J. Vernon McGee. Most of what I said in these videos came directly from one of these books, although I have been guilty of editing sentences or paragraphs for brevity. Mostly I've used their words, but I have occasionally translated academic language into what I would call everyday English. In doing so, I have tried to avoid, to paraphrase Robert Alter, the heresy of using translation as a vehicle for explaining the author's position instead of representing it with different words. Of course, I'm also responsible for selecting which of their ideas to include in the videos and handouts. Julie Ann Duncan, for example, wrote over 200 pages of commentary to examine 8 pages of the book of Ecclesiastes. While I have attempted to convey the ideas accurately, I certainly did not attempt to incorporate all of their ideas in a 6-session study. So essentially, it has been their ideas and my narrative. If you want more detailed insight into Qohelet's writing, you may certainly pick up copies of their books. Early in the 20th century, the German scholar Hubert Grimm noticed the similarities between the book of Ecclesiastes and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Both Robert Alter and Julie Ann Duncan discussed this relationship in their commentaries. Duncan includes several sources or references to the Gilgamesh epic in her bibliography. So this is not a novel idea. The Epic of Gilgamesh has also been considered a possible source tied to the flood story in the book of Genesis. In this study, we use the Second Norton Critical Edition of the Epic of Gilgamesh, translated by Benjamin R. Foster. But there are several other translations available if you're interested. Finally, before we turn to chapter 11, I wanted to say a few words about death. One of the major concerns of this book, death as a fact of life, is something we become acquainted with early on. Whether we suffer the devastating loss of someone dear to us or are fortunate enough in our early years to be spared all but a distant awareness of death, eventually we learn that all living creatures must die. Yet acknowledgement of this reality and the realization that we ourselves will die, that our own breath will cease, are two different things. We know that we die, and yet we do not know. The terror of death and the inconceivability of our own dissolution spur us to find ways to distance or keep it abstract. The psychic drive to distance ourselves from death is portrayed in a brief scene from Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Ivan's acquaintance and colleague Peter Ivanovich ponders the final anguished days of Ivan's life. 3 days of frightful suffering and then death. Why that might suddenly at any time happen to me, he thought. and for a moment felt terrified. But he did not himself know how. The customary reflection at once occurred to him that this had happened to Ivan Ilyich, not to him, and that it should not and could not happen to him. After which reflection, Peter Ivanovich felt reassured and began to ask with interest about the details of Ivan Ilyich's death, as though death was an accident natural to Ivan Ilyich, but certainly not to himself. The stratagems by which we seek to distance death from ourselves are indeed numerous and inventive. We generalize its application as Peter Ivanovich does. Others die. We put it away from our sight in hospitals, hospices, and funeral parlors. We engage in frantic amusements to stave off awareness, and we attempt to displace our identity onto something that is not ourselves, our name, our achievements, our possessions, our progeny. All of these are means by which we avoid speaking in the first person when it comes to death. Helmut Thillich, the author of Living with Death, points to a parable from the Gospel of Luke which trenchantly interrogates the dynamics of death denial. Jesus tells the story of a rich man who thinks himself set for life because he has packed his barns with an abundant harvest. But God responds with the news that he will die that very night. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? The impingement of death consciousness on the farmer's self-satisfied conversation with himself surfaces the question of the personal nature of dying. As Thillich observes, it is the fact of death, like no other fact, that strips us of the illusory idea that we can hide among our possessions. In such a moment, the self is nakedly exposed. The question of identity is posed to us. Qohelet tells us we do not, in fact, survive our accomplishments, our name, or our possessions. In short, he tells us we cannot send a proxy to death. This is a dread-inspiring realization, and yet it is potentially redemptive. The paradox of death awareness is that even as it inspires dread, it affords an opportunity that is ours through this route alone. The realization of the personal nature of dying, I die, offers me a chance to meet myself, to confront the question of my identity, who I am, apart from the possessions, endeavors, ambitions, and accomplishments that so readily and subtly become synonymous with who I am. Now we turn to chapter 11. The opening verses of chapter 11 are pivotal in the book. They speak of the uncertainty of future events and our inability to control or plan for them. The phrase, "you do not know," occurs 4 times in the first 6 verses. Let's read verses 1 and 2, chapter 11. Send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back. Divide your means 7 ways, or even 8. For you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. These are the first of several maxims on how to conduct your life in the face of unpredictability of events and their deterministic character that is beyond human control. The New American Bible translates these verses, "Send your grain across the seas, and in time you will get a return. Divide your merchandise among 7 ventures, 8 maybe, since you do not know what disasters may occur on earth." It may sound a little bit like modern day advice to diversify your investment portfolio. Alter thinks the sending out of bread on the waters is surely not advice about overseas investments, as some commentators have imagined, but rather a didactic metaphor. The proposal of Rashi ibn Ezra and other medieval commentators that the references to acts of charity is perfectly plausible. Perform acts of beneficence, for you never know when you yourself may benefit from having done them. The idea is then continued in the next verse, be generous to any number of people, for in the course of events you yourself may end up in need and enjoy a reciprocation of support from one of those you have helped. McGee said, "Don't be afraid of doing good, although the reward may be late in arriving, and when you are doing good, be sure to help more than one person. help quite a few people because you may get into trouble yourself at some later time. And there will be many people who will be willing to help you. He also considers this the best course of action for the do-gooder, for the moral man, the man who wants to live the good life and wants to go down the middle, neither hot nor cold, right nor left. These two verses are in the wisdom form of an admonition. An instruction is followed by a clause that motivates the listener to follow it. Do this because that will happen as a result. Duncan translates verse 1 as, send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you may get it back. There is some uncertainty in the future here, but that is not the main point. In verse 2, the uncertain future is the motivation. Whether the advice is read literally as a word to merchants or as a figure of speech into life's various endeavors, it is generally taken as a balanced recommendation to risk some while protecting one's interests. The other interpretation is the encouragement to give generously of your resources to others. In times, such deeds may be rewarded in unexpected fashions. Ellen Davis elaborated on the observation of Rashi like this: not only should you give without certainty of repayment, you should give with fair certainty of not being repaid. Disperse as widely as your means will stretch, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. For our instinct is to hoard in anticipation of scarcity. Qohelet's reasoning is, give now. One day you may not have any more to give. No calamity, not even death itself, can strip us of what we have chosen to give away. Let's look at verses 3 through 6. When the clouds are full, they empty rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. Whoever observes the wind will not sow, and whoever regards the clouds will not reap. Just as you do not know how the breath comes to the bones in the mother's womb, so you do not know the work of God, who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at the evening do not let your hands be idle, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. In verse 3, Qohelet continues the thought from verse 2b, citing instances of those disasters the future might hold, drought and wind. The point of his observations is in this verse is human powerlessness before these things. The clouds will bring rain at some point. The tree will fall someplace. But humans cannot control when the rain will come or where the tree will fall. Things will happen when and how they happen. The point in verse 4 is that those who wait for certain knowledge or perfect conditions before taking actions will never act. The direction and force of the wind, the timing of precipitation, knowing these things would allow us to sow and to reap at the ideal time. Yet we cannot know such things. We do not have the crucial information that would guide us to act at the opportune moment. Qohelet allows that we can make certain general predictions regarding circumstances and consequence. When the clouds are full, it will rain. Yet we cannot be certain what will be. There's an element of surprise in the opening phrase of verse 5. Once again, Qohelet evokes the unpredictable and mysterious ways of the Ra, the word used in the previous verse to refer to the wind. Here it means breath, the continuation of the phrase to the bones in the mother's womb signals a shift in focus. Qohelet now speaks of the animating life breath itself, granted by God alone. To signify decisively the limits of human control, the poet uses the ultimate mystery, the origination of a human life. In verse 6, we seem to be back to the more prudential advice. Qohelet recommends that given the uncertainty of future events, one would do well to diversify one's investment, figuratively and perhaps literally. We don't know that the seed you planted this morning will bear fruit, so don't stop with that, but plant some more seed in the evening, maybe a different kind of seed. Here he is back to the instructional form of the opening verses. One cannot be certain of the consequences of any particular action. Throughout his book, Qohelet reflects an acute consciousness of the arbitrary nature of human existence. In the end, we are not masters of our own destiny. Things beyond our power may have a decisive role in whether or not our dearest hopes and most passionate aspirations will reach fruition. Another response to the radically contingent nature of human effort and existence is paralysis, an abdication of all action. This is the state of the third servant in Jesus' parable on the talents in Matthew 25:14 through 30. He stows his talents in the ground for safekeeping rather than trading with it. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. Even those who live many years should rejoice in them all. Yet let them remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. These words are another exhortation by Qohelet to enjoy the good things of this fleeting life while we still have it. Nabokov movingly puts it in the opening sentence of Speak Memory. Common sense tells us that our existence is but a crack between two eternities of darkness. The last line, all that comes is vanity, or whatever comes is mere breath or vapor. It is unlikely that this refers to death, as some have claimed, because in Qohelet it is darkness that is associated with death, whereas vapor or mere breath or vanity is rather the futile substance of worldly experience. Whatever happens then in our lives is mere breath, fleeting, insubstantial, without meaning, and all we can do is to take pleasure in what seems pleasurable. Let's go to verse 9. Rejoice, young man, while you are young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Follow the inclination of your heart and the desire of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. In 11:9, Qohelet turns his focus to the young man, the presumed recipient of his admonitions. Qohelet's heightened emphasis is seen in the fact that he addresses him directly and speaks in the imperative. Take joy, he says, and let your heart cheer you while you are young. We are ready to hear, rise early, work energetically, and avoid all forms of idleness. Instead, Qohelet doesn't sound at all like the sages of Proverbs. Instead, he tells the youth to go in the ways of his heart and in the sights of his eyes. That is, pursue his desires. There is also a reminder of divine judgment. The notion of accountability for one's deeds is not at all foreign to Qohelet's thought. The advice to the youth is followed up in verse 10. Banish anxiety from your mind and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. The point here may be that the young man will one day have no choice about removing pain or trouble from his body. He should act now while things are within his power. The urgency is underscored with the final line, for youth and the dawn of life are fleeting or vapor. The instruction to the young man continues on into chapter 12. In the first 8 verses of chapter 12, we read the final words of Qohelet. Verses 9 through 14 serve as an epilogue and apparently were written by a later editor. So we begin chapter 12, verse 1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. In the days of your youth, or in the days of your prime, is when you should remember your Creator. The stress on the evanescence of the years of vigor before decrepitude and death continues the theme of the last 4 verses of chapter 11. Now let's read verses 2 through 8. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return with the rain, in the day when the guards of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the women who grind cease working because they are few, and those who look through the windows see dimly, when the doors on the street are shut and the sound of the grinding is low and one rises up at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of song are brought low, When one is afraid of heights and terrors are in the road, the almond trees blossom, the grasshopper drags itself along, and the caper bud falls, because all must go to their eternal home, and the mourners will go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, and the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is broken at the fountain, and the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, all is vanity. This passage begins with a metaphor for the personal catastrophe of aging. Everything goes dark. And in this ultimate storm, the clouds continue to blanket the sky even after the rain, perhaps because the sense of sight is dimmed. The book of Qohelet properly concludes with this haunting and also mystifying poem on the waning of human life and on impending death. Some of the references in this poem are ambiguous or simply unclear. A tradition of interpretation that goes back to late antiquity reads the poem as an allegory of the deterioration of the body, but the allegory, plausible for some of the images, breaks down elsewhere. The literal picture of a house from an estate in decay is eloquent in itself, and rituals of mourning are clearly enacted outside the house. At best, certain lines, but not others, also invite comparisons with parts of the aging body. In the silence that falls as the maids cease their labor of grinding, the sound of a solitary bird, no cheerful songbird, stands out, and the songstresses on their part fall silent and are bowed low. Verse 6 about broken pitchers and bowls may refer to pottery that was actually broken at burial sites as a sign of mourning. In verse 7, we hear this vivid image of human death, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it. The various figures in this climactic moment of this poem are richly elusive, reflecting a poignant awareness of both the elegant splendor of human and our abject vulnerability. Vanity of vanities, or more properly, vapor of vapors, says Qohelet. All is vapor. The theme words that introduce Qohelet's works in chapter 1 now conclude with them. At the same time, the statement is a fitting climax to his final contemplation of the transitory nature of human existence. Verses 9 through 14 constitute an epilogue, a tribute to Qohelet the wise. This passage was written by an editor, and some commentators identify two writers in this final segment, one favorable to Qohelet's work and one wary of it. So let's begin with verses 9 and 10. Besides being wise, the teacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs. The teacher sought to find pleasing words, and he wrote words of truth plainly. So Qohelet was not only a sage, but one might also say a lecturing and publishing sage, one who gave public instructions and edited and formulated maxims. Let's go on to verses 11 and 12. The sayings of the wise are like goads, and like the nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings that are given by one shepherd. Of anything beyond these, my child, beware. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The images of goads and nails suggest that the word of the wise may sting or hurt, which seems especially appropriate for Qohelet's writing. Goads were used to prod along livestock. The tribute is followed by a warning or admonition of some sort. But there are some grammatical ambiguities in verse 12 that have led to different understandings of the nature of the caution. McGee simply says education will not solve the problems of life. According to Alter, the author of the epilogue wants to warn readers that all this writing, including Qohelet's, may simply exhaust one and perhaps distract one from the simple duties of piety. As such, the term chatter may be a better translation than study. The Hebrew term is lahag, which may mean either speech or study. Of anything beyond these, my child, beware. Of making many books there is no end, and much chatter is a weariness of the flesh. Duncan suggests that it is the activities of making books and study that generates weariness, not the content of the books or the results of the study. We go on to verses 13 and 14. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Qohelet 2, at a couple of points, expressed the idea that we are subject to God's judgment. But this admonition at the very end seems to affirm the staunch piety with which the writer wants to contain the more disruptive ideas of Qohelet. Because Qohelet's thoughts are expressed in the subjective mode, we are aware of Qohelet as an individual expressing a perspective. The impression is underscored by the fact that such acknowledgments are voiced as a debate within himself, a conflict between what he observes and what tradition has taught him. In contrast, the statement of the final editor or writer is presented objectively. The speaker does not make us conscious of himself and therefore of a viewpoint which leaves the impression of something finally authoritative, handed down from on high. Qohelet has said many provocative things in the course of his reflections on life under the sun. All the more interesting, then, that it is the lingering question of divine retribution that is the very final writer has chosen to set straight. It is not difficult to recognize humanity's deep-seated desire to articulate an ordered world in which everyone receives their just deserts in the end. Qohelet remains unsettled by the sight of the vulnerable in the hands of the oppressor. He voices both the belief that God will judge and the reality of the sight before his eyes, the travesty of the good perishing in their goodness and their evil flourishing in their wickedness. And here is where we must end our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Of course, with Qohelet's writings, there is always another question, always more to say. How can we resolve this paradox of what we are told must be true and what we see with our own eyes? It is vanity, it's vapor, it's mere breath. I hope these sessions have been useful in understanding the book of Ecclesiastes. As always, I appreciate any comments or concerns that you may have. I hope you can join us in our discussion Monday evening. If you have not already done so, you can send an email to online.classes@northgateumc.org to get the Zoom link. Meanwhile, have a good week.
People talk about difference, but I just see the same. Every heart need kindness, every soul need a name, and we're deep. Children laughing somewhere, sounds of better days. Keep the light inside you, don't let the darkness stay. So sing a song for mercy, sing it clear and kind. We all walk this same good earth, just trying to ease our mind.